Before we start, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications because this is not just a story. It's a warning about how the real monsters sometimes live under the same roof and wear the mask of family. You don't want to miss how this ends. The night Adrian Crest drove his graphite-black Falcon X up the private hill to his estate, the city lights spread out below like a carpet of stars that didn't impress him anymore, but something in his chest felt off, as if his instincts were digging their claws into his ribs and begging him to turn around. He had cut short a week-long trip to Singapore after closing a massive deal, already picturing the look on his daughter's face when he appeared at the door 3 days earlier than promised, and the way his fiancée, Harper, would laugh in surprise and scold him for not telling her he was coming home. Yet, the moment the biometric gate slid open and the mansion loomed in front of him, all sharp angles of concrete, glass, and steel, he had the strange sensation that he was walking straight into a storm no one else could see. He killed the engine and stepped out, the cool winter air brushing his face, and for a second he stood there just listening, expecting to hear the faint echo of Mia's laughter carrying from somewhere. Maybe from the art room where she sprawled on the floor, surrounded by crayons, or from the little greenhouse where Harper liked to sit with her while they painted plants. But instead there was nothing, no music, no staff shuffling in the background, just a heavy silence that settled over the courtyard like a shroud. The front door recognized his fingerprint and unlocked with a soft click. Adrian pushed it open and walked into the vast foyer, polished stone reflecting the soft, recessed lights, the huge abstract painting his mother had chosen, dominating one wall with angry strokes of red and black. "Mia, Peanut, guess who's home early?" he called, his voice bouncing around the empty space. "Harper, I brought something for you too." No answer. His brow furrowed. At this hour, the house was never this quiet. Mia's school driver dropped her off at 4, and Harper had moved all of her wedding planning boards into the garden lounge, where she reigned over swatches of fabric and flower samples like a general mapping out a campaign. He set his carry-on next to the stairs and slipped a hand into his coat pocket, feeling the small velvet box he'd picked up in the duty-free in Changi. Platinum, delicate, with a deep blue sapphire that had made him think of the way Harper's eyes glowed when she looked at Mia, and he felt the first sting of irritation crawl up his spine. Maybe they were in the back garden, he thought. Maybe they were watching a movie with the volume low. Maybe Mia was asleep. He moved through the halls, his Italian shoes tapping softly on the floor, calling their names again, checking the kitchen where the overhead lights hummed but no one cooked, the media room where the massive screen was dark, the sunroom where Mia's easel stood abandoned, a half-finished painting of a crooked house, and 3 figures still wet on the canvas. The silence started to feel wrong, not peaceful but suffocating, and that's when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it. A thin, strangled noise drifting in from somewhere beyond the glass doors that led to the backyard. At first he thought it might be the wind, but it came again, a choked sob, the kind you only hear from someone who has been crying so long their voice is shredded. His heart cramped. Without even realizing it, he broke into a run, sliding open the glass doors and stepping out onto the terrace, his breath puffing in the chill. The infinity pool shimmered under the distant city glow, the manicured lawn stretched out like a dark blanket, and at the far edge of the property, half swallowed by the shadows of old trees, stood the only part of the estate his father had refused to demolish. A small brick outbuilding with a moss-stained tiled roof, the former caretaker's shower room and storage, long since declared off-limits to Mia, and supposedly always locked. That was where the sound was coming from. It wasn't loud, but it was raw, desperate, and each half-sob jabbed at him like a needle. "Mia!" he called, voice cracking. No reply, only the ragged hiccup of air from a small chest, trying not to make noise. Adrian's legs moved faster than his thoughts. He cut across the lawn, feeling the soft grass and patches of damp soil give way under his shoes, not caring about mud, not caring about anything but that sound. The closer he got, the clearer the crying became. No longer a vague whimper, but quiet, broken pleas, the way a child cries when they've been terrified into silence. His blood went cold. The outbuilding's wooden door, warped, faded, with paint peeling from years of neglect, was secured by a metal latch on the outside, the kind you only close when you want to keep something in. And the latch was down, locked, from the outside. For a heartbeat, his brain refused to process that simple mechanical fact. Then something inside him roared awake, and his hand shot out for the latch, ripping it up so violently rusty flakes flew into the air. His knuckles scraped on the corroded metal, splitting skin. But he didn't feel it. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and it flew open with a groan that seemed to tear at the hinges. The smell hit him first. Damp concrete, old mildew, metal pipes, stale air. The narrow tiled room beyond was lit only by a small, grimy window near the ceiling that let in a gray sliver of evening. The once white tiles were spiderwebbed with cracks, some streaked with dark stains that might have been mold, might have been something worse. In the middle of that miserable little cell on the cold floor was Mia. His daughter was curled into herself like a wounded animal, arms wrapped tight around her legs, chin tucked into her knees, thin shoulders shaking. Her long dark hair clung to her wet cheeks, and a harsh hiccuping sound escaped her every few seconds. Her favorite blue dress, the one with tiny embroidered stars that Harper had helped her pick out for the school art fair last week, was smeared with dirt and tears and something that looked suspiciously like dried soap scum from the floor. "Mia," Adrian choked. The word ripped from somewhere deep inside. But what snapped something vital in him wasn't just the sight of her. It was what surrounded her. All around her on the floor lay dozens of ripped pieces of paper. No, not just paper, he realized in a dizzy rush. Her drawings. Mia's entire world lived in those sketches. She drew everything: strange houses, floating animals, crooked suns, herself and Adrian, and lately, herself with Adrian and Harper, three stick-figure-ish people holding hands under messy hearts. Now those drawings lay shredded, crumpled, stomped into the damp grime, the vibrant crayons smeared into ugly streaks, like someone had taken a boot to them again and again. The crayons themselves, bright wax soldiers in their little box when he left, were scattered in fragments, snapped, crushed, some ground into the grout in deliberate arcs, as if whoever destroyed them had taken their time and enjoyed it. For a split second, Adrian's brain emptied, tunnels of noise roaring in his ears, and then he saw the other figure in the room. She stood to the side, halfway between the doorway and the little girl on the ground, as if she'd been frozen in motion. Harper, his fiancée, the woman who had fallen asleep on the floor next to Mia's bed when she had nightmares, who made her pancakes shaped like cats, who had once cried in the kitchen when Mia called her the other mom. Harper, with her honey-brown hair pulled into a loose knot, wearing the soft gray sweater he loved, her hands held slightly away from her body, palms empty, eyes wide and stunned. She turned when the door flew open, her face going from confusion to a kind of horrified comprehension when she saw Adrian's expression. "Adrian," she breathed, taking a step toward him. "Wait, it's not—" But he was already moving, crossing the cracked tiles in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside Mia, scooping his daughter into his arms. The child shrieked at the sudden movement, a raw, high shiver of sound, flailing for a second before she registered the familiar warmth, the smell of his cologne. "Daddy," she sobbed then, and the way her little hands clawed at his shirt shredded what was left of his reason. She clung to his neck, her fingers digging into his skin, like she was afraid the world would rip him away if she didn't hold tight enough. She was freezing, her skin clammy, her legs flecked with specks of dirt and something like dried cleaning foam. Adrian stood up with her, feeling his muscles coil with anger and something older, darker, the ancient violence of a parent whose child has been hurt. He turned slowly toward Harper, and in that moment every memory of his ex-wife, of her laughing with photographers while legal documents severing his visitation rights rested in her designer bag, of her leaving the country with a married actor and sending a single text saying, "Mia will be better off without you," crashed through him in a tidal wave of old wounds. He didn't see the woman who had been kind and patient for the last year. He saw betrayal wearing a familiar face. "What the hell is this?" he asked, but his voice sounded wrong even to him, low and dangerous. Harper's lips parted, her face already pale, blanched, completely. "Adrian, I just got here," she said, stepping closer despite the fury radiating off him. "I heard a noise. I came to check. I swear I was about to—" "You were about to what?" he snarled, the word sharp enough to slice. "You were about to comfort her? To let her out? How did she get in here to begin with? How long has she been here?" Mia's arms tightened around his neck, her small body shaking. "Dark," she whimpered against his collarbone. "Too dark. My pictures. She broke them." "Who locked this door?" Adrian demanded, his gaze flicking to the latch outside, then back to Harper. "If you had just arrived, this wouldn't have been latched from the outside." The logic slammed into him all at once, fueled not by calm reasoning but by panic, by every worst-case scenario his brain could conjure when it came to his daughter. Harper glanced at the latch, and he saw genuine bewilderment flicker in her eyes, but his mind was already charging ahead, filling in the blanks with the ugliest answers. "I didn't lock it," she said, her voice shaking now too. "I was in the West Wing, going over the— Adrian, please, you know I would never—" "Do I?" he cut in, and Harper flinched like he'd struck her. "Do I really know that? I leave my daughter and my home in your hands. I trust you, and I come back to find Mia locked like an animal in a filthy room, surrounded by the destroyed drawings she loves more than anything. You expect me to believe you just found her like this? That you just happened to be standing here, watching?" "I wasn't watching," Harper snapped, desperation cracking through her calm. "I was trying to figure out how to get her out without scaring her even more. I was about to go for help when I heard you. I didn't know the door was latched. Adrian, listen to me. This isn't—" "Enough!" he shouted, and Mia jerked in his arms, whimpering. "Don't say another word about caring, about loving her, because whatever happened in here today is abuse. And if you had even an ounce of decency, you'd admit it instead of standing in a room full of evidence and telling me to ignore what I'm seeing with my own eyes." Behind him, footsteps pounded across the lawn. Two figures appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Lila and Carmen, the two housekeepers who had been with the Crest estate for years, since before his father passed, women who had watched Adrian grow up and now fussed over Mia like surrogate aunts. "Signor Adrian," Lila gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "We heard yelling, we—" Her gaze dropped to Mia in his arms, then to the destroyed drawings, and her face crumpled. "Oh, Dios mio," Carmen whispered, eyes filling, her gaze darting nervously toward Harper. "Who did this?" Adrian demanded, the question aimed at the universe, at the women, at the walls. "Did either of you know my daughter was in here? Did either of you see who locked this door?" The two housekeepers exchanged one of those quick, charged glances that tell a story all on their own. Harper turned to them, hope flickering in her expression like a candle trying not to die in a storm. "Tell him," she pleaded, stepping toward them. "Tell him how I treat Mia. Tell him I would never hurt her. He knows you've watched us together." For a second, Lila's lips trembled like she might speak, might say something comforting, something true. But Carmen grabbed her arm, fingers digging in warningly. Carmen's gaze flicked upward toward the house, toward the right wing balcony where heavy curtains had just moved ever so slightly. Adrian didn't see the movement, but he noticed the fear that flooded their faces like ink in water. "Señor," Carmen began, her voice thin, strained, "we wanted to tell you de verdad, but Miss Harper always said we would lose our jobs if we spoke. She said she could convince you we were stealing, that she would ruin our names. She locks the Nina when you travel. She says Mia is too noisy, that her drawings are trash, that you spoil her too much." Every word was a nail driven into his skull. Adrian stared at Carmen, at Lila, at Harper, whose face had gone from hopeful to horrified disbelief. "That's a lie," Harper shouted, tears finally spilling over. "You know it's a lie. I've never threatened you. I've never locked Mia anywhere. Why are you saying this?" "Because they're afraid," a small, hoarse voice whispered against Adrian's neck, but Mia's words were so soft he barely heard them, drowned by the roar of his own rage. The rational part of his brain knew he should slow down, ask questions, cross-check details, but the image of his daughter, locked in darkness, surrounded by the shredded pieces of her joy, overrode everything. He held Mia closer, feeling how she clung to him, and something inside him hardened. "Get out," he said to Harper, but the way he said it made the air seem to drop 10 degrees. Harper blinked. "What?" "You heard me." "Get out of my house," Adrian repeated, voice low and deadly calm. "You have 10 minutes to pack your things. Lila, Carmen. You'll follow her, and you'll make sure she doesn't take anything that belongs to this family. If she's still on this property after 10 minutes, I will personally call the police and press every charge I can for child endangerment." "Adrian, this is insane," Harper said, trying to step closer again. He stepped back, instinctively shielding Mia with his body, and Harper froze like she'd touched an invisible wall. "Someone did this to her," she insisted, her voice breaking. "But it wasn't me, and if you throw me out now, you're leaving her alone with the person who really did. Please, you know I love her. You've seen it." "Don't you dare use that word," Adrian hissed. "Love doesn't leave a child shivering in a dark, filthy room and tear apart the one thing that makes her feel safe. Love doesn't do this. Love also doesn't believe strangers over the person who has been there for his daughter every day for the last year," Harper shot back. But there was no real fight left behind it, only hurt. "Ask yourself why these women are suddenly brave enough to talk. Ask yourself who they're really afraid of." He didn't want to hear it. The more she spoke, the more doubt tried to crawl into his mind, and he slammed the door on it. 10 minutes, he said again, turning away so he wouldn't have to watch her face as his words landed. "Then I never want to see you anywhere near my daughter again." He carried Mia out into the cold night, away from the reek of mildew, away from the graveyard of paper and wax on the floor, away from the woman whose voice still followed him, begging him to listen. The staff trailed behind them in silence, and when he finally stepped back into the mansion, the warmth inside jarred against the ice that had taken hold of his insides. He took Mia straight upstairs to her room, soft fairy lights, shelves overflowing with books and stuffed animals, the complete opposite of the hellish little cell outside. and sat with her on the bed while she clung to him like a lifeline, refusing to let go even to change out of her dirty dress. "Daddy," she whispered eventually, eyes swollen, throat raw. "If Harper goes, is it just me and Grandma now?" The question stabbed him. "It's me and you," he said, forcing a reassuring smile. "Always me and you, Peanut." But even as he said it, the name Grandma hung in the air like a shadow. Evelyn Crest, his mother, had ruled this house long before he remodeled it. Elegant, controlled, always perfectly dressed, she'd stepped back publicly when Adrian became the face of the family. But behind the scenes, she still arranged schedules, grilled tutors, corrected staff with a razor-edged politeness that cut more deeply than shouting ever could. She had tolerated Harper with a gracious smile that never quite reached her eyes, calling her sweet in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. She had also never liked Mia's drawings, dismissing them as clutter and insisting Mia should focus on piano lessons and etiquette instead. Adrian pushed the thought away. Evelyn was strict, yes, and sometimes harsh in ways he didn't like, but she was old school, not cruel. She loved him. She loved Mia in her own rigid way. That's what he'd always told himself. There was a knock at the door, a gentle one. Evelyn stepped into the room, her silver hair swept into a flawless twist, her tailored navy suit unwrinkled despite the hour. Her eyes went immediately to Mia, then to Adrian. "I heard shouting," she said softly, her voice wrapped in concern like velvet over steel. "What happened?" Adrian swallowed the rage threatening to spill out. "I found Mia locked in the old shower room," he said, jaw clenched. "In the dark, her drawings destroyed. Harper was there." Evelyn's expression sharpened, the corners of her mouth tightening just enough to signal displeasure. She approached the bed but didn't sit, maintaining a slight distance that always made her seem more imposing. "I warned you about that woman," she murmured, resting a light hand on his shoulder that felt heavier than his own guilt. "These girls who come from nothing, who suddenly find themselves in a house like this, with access to our name, our resources, they'll do anything to secure their place. A child, especially a sensitive one like Mia, becomes an obstacle, a nuisance. I'm only surprised she showed her true nature this soon." "She swears she didn't do it," Adrian muttered, feeling strangely defensive even as anger still pulsed through him. He hated that Harper's voice. "You're leaving her with the real culprit," kept replaying in his mind. Evelyn's eyes softened in that practiced maternal way she'd perfected over decades. "Of course she swears it," she said. "They always do. Your ex-wife swore she wasn't cheating, remember? Swore she left for her career, not for that wealthy actor. You are a brilliant man, Adrian, but when it comes to women, you have such a generous heart that you forget to protect yourself and your child. You see what you want to see, not what is. Thankfully, Mia has you, and she has me." She turned her gaze to the little girl huddled against him. "Mia, darling, you're safe now. That woman is gone. I will make sure she never comes near you again." Mia stiffened almost imperceptibly, burying her face deeper into Adrian's shirt, fingers tightening as if she didn't want to let her grandmother's words touch her. He felt the slight tremor move through her and assumed it was residual fear from the room, from the darkness, from the shock of being locked away. He kissed the top of her head and murmured soothing nonsense until her eyelids drooped, heavy with exhaustion. When she finally slipped into an uneasy sleep, still clinging to a fold of his shirt, Evelyn patted his shoulder again. "You did the right thing," she said, like a judge passing an official verdict. "Women like Harper are poison in the long run. Better to cut them out cleanly before they sink their claws any deeper." "I told her to leave," Adrian said hollowly. 10 minutes. Evelyn's lips twitched in something very close to satisfaction. "I'll instruct the staff to change all her access codes first thing in the morning," she replied. "Now you should rest too. Tomorrow we'll restore order. Mia will begin new routines. Structure is what she needs." She left quietly, closing the door behind her. In the silent room, with his daughter's shallow breaths tickling his neck, Adrian stared at the shadows on the ceiling, feeling like the walls of his own home were inching closer. Down the hall, in the wing of guest suites, Harper stood in the middle of the room that had temporarily been hers, staring at the half-packed suitcase on the bed as if it belonged to someone else. Her hands shook as she shoved clothes inside at random, not caring if anything wrinkled, her vision blurring with angry, helpless tears. On the dresser sat a framed photo of her with Adrian and Mia from a weekend in the countryside. Adrian with his arms slung around both of them, Mia perched on her shoulders, all three of them laughing at something stupid. Harper had thought, truly, deeply thought, that this time she had found a family, not just a man. Now, with the weight of Adrian's accusations still crushing her chest, she realized how fragile that illusion had been. "It doesn't make sense," she whispered to herself, dragging the zipper closed. "None of it makes sense." When she'd gone to look for Mia earlier in the afternoon and found the little girl missing from her usual haunts, she'd asked Lila and Carmen if they'd seen her. They'd avoided her eyes, muttering something about the grandmother having called Mia upstairs for lessons. Harper had frowned at that. Mia hated etiquette drills, and Evelyn usually summoned her with a stiff knock, not a quiet relocation. A few minutes later, Harper had heard what sounded like a muffled thump outside and a faint, distressed whine. She'd followed the noise and found the outbuilding door slightly ajar. She'd pushed it open and seen Mia on the floor, shivering, eyes wide with terror. Harper had rushed forward, dropping to her knees, scooping the child into her arms, rocking her, asking what happened. But Mia had been too frightened, too overwhelmed, barely able to speak. Harper had looked around at the destroyed drawings, at the snapped crayons, her mind racing, and she'd cursed herself for not bringing her phone, for leaving it charging on the nightstand. She'd been about to run back to the house to get help when she heard the roar of an engine, and then Adrian's footsteps pounding across the lawn. And now here she was, painted as the villain, exiled from the only place that had felt like home in years. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then froze with her hand on the knob as an image hit her, clearer than anything else in the chaos of the last hour. Mia's eyes, not when Adrian carried her out, but a few seconds before, when Harper had first found her. The way the little girl's gaze had darted, not toward the door or the broken crayons, but upward, as if she expected someone to appear there, as if she were more afraid of being seen by that someone than of being trapped. Someone, or something. Harper saw again the quick, nervous glances Lila and Carmen had exchanged, the way they hadn't looked at her when they lied, the way their eyes had ticked toward the main house, toward the balcony of Evelyn's suite, just for a fraction of a second. "They're not scared of me," Harper whispered to the empty room, her heart starting to pound for a different reason now. "They're scared of her." She slowly let go of the doorknob and turned back into the room, her mind clicking into a different gear, the one that had helped her survive a childhood in foster homes and bad relationships, the gear of strategy. If she walked out now, angry and wounded, Evelyn would win. Mia would be alone with a woman who valued reputation and control more than a child's happiness, maybe even more than her safety. Adrian, blind with guilt and old scars, would wrap himself tighter in his mother's influence, convinced he was protecting his daughter by keeping everything in the family. And Mia, Mia would learn that the one adult who believed in her drawings, who sat on the floor with her, who called her artist instead of mess, had left without a fight. "No," Harper said aloud, and her voice came out different this time, less broken, more solid. "No, I'm not abandoning her. Not like that." She moved quickly to the closet and pulled out a small cardboard box from the top shelf, the one she hadn't unpacked fully when she moved in, because the item inside was more sentimental than practical. A small, slightly scruffy teddy bear with one ear a little flatter than the other, the last thing she'd kept from her own childhood. Except this bear had a secret that wasn't sentimental at all. A month before moving into the Crest estate, living alone in her cramped apartment, Harper had bought a cheap nanny-cam online, a tiny lens hidden inside the bear's stitched snout, to check on her dog while she was at work. She'd never actually installed it fully at Adrian's place. There were cameras everywhere in the estate already, all under Evelyn's watchful control. But the bear still worked. She'd charged it out of habit before packing it away. She lifted it gently now, pressing her thumb to the seam where the power switch was hidden. A faint vibration tickled her fingertip as the device came to life. She opened her phone, thumb flying across the screen as she logged into the old app she hadn't used in months. The interface was clunky, the resolution far from perfect, but the feed blinked on, waiting for an image. Harper tucked the phone into her purse and hugged the bear to her chest for a second, feeling the absurdity of it. This soft, worn toy becoming a weapon in a war she hadn't even known she was fighting until today. If you're still with me, don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next is where the mask finally starts to crack, and the real face of evil shows up, she murmured to herself, half to calm her nerves, half imagining the viewers who would one day hear this story, warning them that sometimes the heroes are the ones everyone blames at first. Then she straightened her shoulders, shoved the bear into her bag so that just its head peeked out, and finally opened the door. The hallway outside felt colder, the walls taller. As she walked toward the grand staircase, clutching the handle of her suitcase, she saw shadows in the corners where there had been light before. Lila and Carmen peeked from the kitchen doorway, eyes wide and guilty, but Harper didn't stop, didn't look at them long enough for Evelyn to accuse her later of intimidating the staff. She descended the stairs and found Adrian waiting in the foyer, arms folded, jaw tight, his eyes red-rimmed from emotion and exhaustion, but his posture still rigid with anger. Evelyn stood beside him, slightly behind, like a queen consort at a royal sentencing, her expression sorrowful but firm. "Your time is up," Adrian said, his voice hoarse but unyielding. Harper set her suitcase down and looked at him for a long moment. She'd come here planning to argue, to shout, to throw back every unfair accusation he'd flung at her. But now the words died on her tongue. It wouldn't matter. He was still drowning in the image he'd walked in his history with another woman who had lied. Any defense she offered would bounce off the armor of his fear. He would only hear what confirmed what he already believed. So instead, Harper did something else. "I will go," she said quietly, and Adrian's eyebrows drew together, surprised at her compliance. "But before I do, I want you to remember something, Adrian. Your daughter wasn't just scared down there. She was conditioned. You didn't see the way she flinched before she even knew it was you holding her. You didn't see where her eyes kept going when I tried to calm her down. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking up, toward the house." Evelyn made a small, disdainful noise, but Harper ignored her. "If you really love her, don't just trust what people tell you. Watch what they do when you're not around. Look at who she shrinks away from and who she runs toward. That's where the truth is." "Enough," Evelyn said sharply. "You've done enough damage. Leave with the scraps of dignity you have left." Harper's mouth curved in a humorless half-smile. "You're right," she said, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she met Evelyn's gaze directly, unflinching. "I should leave before I say what I really think of you." She picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. Her hand was on the handle when she paused and looked back at Adrian one last time. "One more thing," she added softly. "If you ever feel, even for a second, that something doesn't add up, if you wake up one night and feel that same cold in your chest you felt today, don't bury it. Don't let anyone, not even your own blood, talk you out of it. That instinct might be the only thing standing between Mia and someone who doesn't see her as a child, but as an obstacle." Evelyn scoffed audibly, but Adrian said nothing. Conflict flickered briefly in his eyes, then vanished under the weight of his decision. Harper opened the door and stepped out into the cold, where a taxi waited at the end of the drive, exhaust curling into the night like ghostly fingers. She pulled her phone from her purse as she walked down the stone steps, her fingers trembling not from the chill, but from the magnitude of what she was about to do. She opened the nanny-cam app again, the bear icon glowing faintly on the screen. Ready. "Hold on just a little longer, Mia," she whispered to the wind, to the little girl asleep, or not, somewhere upstairs. "I'm not done fighting for you. Not yet." She slid into the back seat of the taxi, set the teddy bear upright in her lap, as if it were just a sentimental comfort and not a witness, and tapped the button to connect the feed, praying the signal would reach through the walls of the castle-like house behind her. Because if it did, the camera's unblinking eye was about to show her, and eventually Adrian, who the real monster of this story truly was. If you're still here, take a second to subscribe, because from this point on, the truth begins to peel back in layers, and the deeper we go, the darker it gets. This is the chapter where everyone's masks start to slip, and you'll want to follow every second. Adrian barely slept that night, slumped in the leather chair near Mia's bed, his head occasionally dipping forward before he jerked awake again, adrenaline and guilt twisting in his gut. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Mia's tiny hands clutching his shirt, saw the ruined drawings on the tile floor, saw Harper's face twisting between disbelief and betrayal, and though he tried to push it away, the faint echo of Harper's warning, "Look at who she shrinks from," kept tapping, tapping, tapping at the back of his mind like a dripping faucet that refused to be ignored. At about 3:40 in the morning, Mia whimpered in her sleep, the kind of whimper that came from nightmares too big for a child to hold, and Adrian leaned over, brushing her hair back gently, whispering, "Daddy's here, Peanut," until she relaxed again. But as he pulled the blanket back over her shoulder, he noticed something he had missed earlier in his shock. Thin, pale marks around Mia's upper arm, almost like pressure bruises, not dark enough to be fresh, but distinct enough to be familiar, as if someone had gripped her too hard. His stomach lurched. Harper had never handled Mia roughly. He had seen her pick the girl up hundreds of times with a softness built from hard childhood memories of not being treated gently herself. Evelyn believed discipline built character, believed firmness was love, believed softness led to weakness. But would she? Adrian stopped the thought before it completed, disgusted at himself for even considering it. His mother could be strict, could be harsh, yes, but physical cruelty? No, impossible. He rubbed his eyes, but when he looked back at Mia's arm, the faint marks were still there. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked. He froze, listening. Another creak, soft, deliberate. Someone walking the west hallway. At this hour, Evelyn sometimes roamed the house when she couldn't sleep, but her steps were measured, confident. These were lighter, quicker. Adrian stood, easing Mia's hand off his sleeve, and slipped out of the room, closing the door a sliver behind him. The hallway was dim except for a nightlight shaped like a moon glowing near the stairs. He listened again. Silence. Then, shuffle, shuffle, a whisper of movement coming from the direction of the service corridor. He followed, heart thumping, not with fear, but with a strange anticipation, as if the answer to everything waited around the corner. When he reached the end of the hall, he saw Carmen hurrying out of the laundry room, still in her uniform, clutching something pressed tightly to her chest. "Carmen," he said sharply, and she jumped so violently she nearly dropped whatever she was holding. "Signor Adrian," she gasped, hiding the object behind her back like a guilty child. "You're awake." "What are you doing?" he asked. She stammered, glanced over her shoulder toward the stairs leading to Evelyn's wing, then whispered, "I was just finishing chores, signor." At 3:45 a.m. He stepped forward. "What's in your hand?" Carmen swallowed, eyes darting again toward the upper floor. "Nothing, signor, just—" Then a small edge of pink paper slipped from her grasp. Adrian grabbed it before she could shove it away. His chest constricted when he saw it. It was one of Mia's drawings, one of the few intact ones from earlier in the week, the one where she'd drawn herself and Harper baking cookies in the kitchen, both of them smiling with huge, exaggerated mouths. Adrian stared at the drawing, then lifted his eyes to Carmen. "Why?" he asked slowly. "Are you carrying my daughter's artwork around the house in the middle of the night?" Carmen opened her mouth, but no words came. Instead, she began to cry, shoulders shaking silently, tears dripping onto the polished tile. "Señor, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We never wanted to hurt the niña. We tried to protect her. We tried, but—" "But what?" Adrian demanded. "Tell me the truth, Carmen. No more lies." Carmen trembled, wiping her face furiously, terrified of saying the wrong thing, but more terrified of saying nothing at all. "It wasn't Miss Harper," she finally whispered, voice breaking. "We lied earlier because Mrs. Crest said she would destroy us if we didn't. She made us. She has been doing things to the niña for months, señor. Things that made Mia afraid of shadows, of closets, of sudden noises. Miss Harper tried to help her, but Mrs. Crest said the niña needed discipline. She said you were too soft, that you would ruin her if she wasn't corrected." Adrian felt his breath leave him in a harsh, stunned exhale, his vision swimming. "What, exactly, did my mother do?" Carmen clasped her hands together as if praying. She would lock the niña in small spaces to teach her not to whine. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. She broke her crayons because she said art made her weak. The niña cried so much. Miss Harper took care of her whenever you traveled, but your mother—" Her voice cracked completely. "Señor, please, you must believe me. If she finds out I told you—" A sharp, slicing voice cut through the hallway behind them. "If who finds out what?" Evelyn Crest stood at the top of the service staircase, wearing a deep burgundy robe, her hair immaculate as always, her posture straight as a blade. Her eyes flicked between Adrian and Carmen, assessing the scene with an icy stillness that made something inside Adrian recoil. "Mother," he said slowly, his heart beginning to thunder, "why are you awake?" "I heard voices," Evelyn answered, descending the stairs gracefully, every step precise. "And I'm allowed to speak to my own son in my own home. Carmen, however, should not be wandering the halls after hours. It gives the impression she is stealing." Carmen made a strangled sound, fear, guilt, helplessness all tangled together. Evelyn's gaze snapped to the crumpled drawing in Adrian's hand. Her expression didn't change, but Adrian saw something flicker in her eyes, a twitch of annoyance, not surprise. "What," Evelyn asked, voice cool, "exactly is happening here?" Adrian's world tilted. He felt the truth hovering at the edge of his mind, a terrible, blinding possibility he had refused to consider until now. But before he could speak, footsteps echoed down the main staircase. Harper. She was still here, in pajamas, her hair mussed, her face blotchy from crying, carrying the teddy bear from her suitcase. She froze when she saw Evelyn, then saw Carmen, then saw Adrian holding the drawing with bloodless fingers. Adrian, Harper said quietly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. There's something you need to see. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. You were supposed to leave. Your presence here is no longer required. Harper didn't look at her. She looked only at Adrian. I didn't leave, she said, voice steady now with a strength born from clarity. Because if I did, Mia would be alone with the person who's really been hurting her. Evelyn's lips curled in a small, polite smile. You poor, delusional thing. Harper ignored her again, lifting the teddy bear with both hands. Adrian, I turned on the nanny-cam in this bear before I left. I put it in Mia's room. I didn't mean to spy, but something felt wrong. I just checked the feed. She swallowed hard. You need to see what's happening upstairs, right now. Carmen let out a choked sob. Evelyn's expression didn't falter, but a faint twitch pulsed at her jawline. Adrian stared at Harper, then at the bear, then at his phone as Harper extended hers toward him. Open it, Harper whispered. If you ever loved Mia, open it. Adrian's thumb hovered above the screen. His pulse hammered in his throat. And then he tapped the live stream. The screen flickered, and an image began to appear. Upstairs, in Mia's bedroom, movement, a shadow near the bed, a figure leaning over Mia as she slept. And that was the moment everything shattered. And if you're watching this unfold, make sure you subscribe, because the truth you're about to see is the kind that takes your breath away and crushes everything you thought you knew about loyalty, blood, and evil. Monster wearing his mother's face. Without another word, he spun on his heel and sprinted toward the stairs, Harper racing after him, Carmen collapsing to her knees and praying under her breath. Adrian stormed up the steps 2 at a time, each one echoing like a war drum, his chest heaving, his vision tunneling. He slammed open Mia's bedroom door so hard it cracked against the wall. Evelyn jerked around, her hands still on Mia's shoulders, her face morphing into a mask of false innocence. Adrian, thank goodness you're here. She was having another episode. Don't, Adrian roared, the word exploding out of him with a force that shook the air. He crossed the room in seconds, ripping Evelyn's hands away from Mia so violently she stumbled backward. Mia ran to Harper without hesitation, burying her face in her stomach, sobbing in great, shuddering bursts. Harper immediately soothed. Evelyn regained her balance, lifting her chin with icy indignation. How dare you speak to me like... Adrian threw the phone at her feet. The live feed was still running. The ruler strike, the threat, the cruelty, the truth. Evelyn looked down, and for the first time in his life, Adrian saw real fear flicker in her eyes. What? What is this? She stammered. A manipulation. That woman planted... Shut up, Adrian thundered, and Evelyn froze mid-step. Not another word, not another lie, not another excuse to justify torturing my daughter. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed uselessly. Harper was crying softly, rocking Mia back and forth. Adrian stepped between Evelyn and them, his voice shaking with a grief so deep it felt bottomless. You locked her in that outbuilding, he said, every syllable a verdict. You destroyed her drawings. You made her afraid of the dark. You convinced the staff to lie. And you did it because you couldn't stand that she loved someone who wasn't you. You did it because you couldn't stand that I loved someone who wasn't you. I did it for you. Evelyn whispered, trembling now like an aging statue cracking under pressure. For this family, for your legacy. She is weak, Adrian. And that woman, she was using you. She loved Mia, Adrian cut in, voice breaking. Something you never learned how to do. Evelyn recoiled as if slapped, but Adrian wasn't finished. You are leaving this house tonight. You will never see Mia again, and you will never, ever control my life again. Evelyn shook her head, disbelief twisting her features. You can't mean that. Adrian, I am your mother. Everything you have, everything you are, came from me. Then take credit for this too, he said, stepping closer, his voice low and lethal. You taught me exactly what kind of parent I will never be. Evelyn's composure shattered. You ungrateful. Get out, Adrian growled, pointing toward the door, before I call the police and hand them this video myself. Evelyn looked from him to Harper to Mia, desperation flooding her expression as she realized she had lost the last person who once believed she had a heart. Then something inside her snapped, her face twisting into a bitter, hate-filled smirk. You think you're rescuing her? She spat. You think she'll grow up strong without me? She'll grow up safe, Harper said, her voice quiet but sharper than any blade. Evelyn's smile evaporated. Adrian opened the door wide, final, unmistakable, and after a long, trembling breath, Evelyn walked out, her shadow shrinking, until she disappeared down the stairs, her footsteps echoing like a fading nightmare. Adrian closed the door. Then he collapsed to his knees in front of Harper and Mia, pulling them both into his arms. For a long time, none of them spoke. The only sound was the soft rhythm of Harper whispering, "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe now." And the quiet sobs of a father who had finally opened his eyes. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The Crest mansion went dark, its corridors empty, its windows shuttered like the eyes of a giant put to sleep. Adrian sold the estate, liquidated the last of his holdings tied to his mother, and moved into a smaller home near the coast. White walls, sunlight everywhere, nothing but fresh air and space for healing. Mia slowly found her laughter again. She filled the new house with drawings, bright ones, messy ones, chaotic ones, and Harper taped every single one to the walls until the place looked like a museum curated by a joyful child. One evening, as Mia painted in the yard with her sleeves rolled up and Harper hummed while washing brushes, Adrian watched them from the doorway, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. Peace, fragile and real. "Daddy, look," Mia called, holding up a picture of 3 figures standing under a golden sky. A girl, a woman, a man, all holding hands. Harper kissed the top of her head. "It's us," Mia said proudly. "Our new family." Adrian swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "Yeah, Peanut," he said softly. "Our real family. And if you've stayed until the end of this story, remember, subscribe. Because stories like these remind us that blood doesn't always mean love. Truth doesn't always come from the loudest voice. And the heroes are often the ones who refuse to look away when darkness moves in silence.